In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where death whispers through every shadow and survival depends on split-second decisions, the most elite warriors in the world found themselves facing an impossible situation. They were Navy SEALs, trained to handle any threat, equipped with the most advanced weapons money could buy, and backed by years of the most brutal training known to mankind. But on this particular night, surrounded by overwhelming enemy forces and terrain that offered no escape, even these legendary fighters found themselves whispering words they rarely spoke: "Send help." What happened next would become the stuff of military legend. From the darkness emerged a figure that seemed to defy every rule of conventional warfare. Moving like smoke through the chaos, striking with deadly precision that left seasoned warriors speechless, and disappearing before anyone could fully comprehend what they had witnessed. By dawn, 25 enemy combatants lay dead, and the SEALs who had called for rescue found themselves saved by someone they never saw coming. This is not a story of fantasy or fiction. This is not about superhuman abilities or impossible feats dreamed up in Hollywood. This is the true account of what happened when desperation met determination, when training collided with instinct, and when one person's actions changed the course of a mission that seemed doomed from the start. It's a story that challenges everything we think we know about warfare, about courage, and about the extraordinary capabilities that emerge when ordinary people face extraordinary circumstances. The identity of the mysterious savior remained classified for years, hidden behind layers of military secrecy and operational security. The SEALs who witnessed the event spoke of it only in whispers, their accounts so incredible that many who heard them dismissed the stories as combat stress or battlefield mythology. But the evidence was undeniable. The bodies were real. The saved lives were real. And somewhere in the official reports buried deep in Pentagon files, the truth waited to emerge. This is that truth. This is the story of how one night in Afghanistan redefined what's possible when everything seems impossible, and how sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places in the most unexpected forms. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Reaper Davidson adjusted his night vision goggles and scanned the rocky terrain below. The Afghan mountains stretched endlessly in all directions, their jagged peaks cutting sharp silhouettes against the star-filled sky. Behind him, his four-man SEAL team moved with the silent precision that had kept them alive through dozens of missions in some of the world's most dangerous places. They were deep in enemy territory, following intelligence that had led them to this remote valley where high-value targets were reportedly meeting to plan attacks against coalition forces. The mission had seemed straightforward when they'd received the briefing 12 hours earlier at the forward operating base. Intelligence suggested that 3 Taliban commanders would be gathering in a compound nestled in the valley floor, discussing plans for coordinated attacks on supply convoys. The SEALs were to conduct surveillance, confirm the target's presence, and, if possible, eliminate the threats. It was the kind of operation they'd executed countless times before. Petty Officer First Class Jake "Thunder" Morrison crouched beside Davidson, his rifle trained on the compound below. Through his scope, he could see movement inside the stone building. Heat signatures indicated multiple people gathering in what appeared to be the main room. Everything matched their intelligence reports. "Looks like our party guests are arriving," Morrison whispered into his throat mic. Chief Petty Officer Sam "Ghost" Rodriguez moved up to their position, his communications equipment crackling softly with routine check-ins from their support team. Rodriguez was the team's communications specialist, responsible for maintaining contact with headquarters and coordinating any necessary support. He was also the most experienced member of the group, having served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. His instincts had kept them out of trouble more times than anyone could count. "Something doesn't feel right," Rodriguez murmured, studying the valley through his binoculars. "Too quiet. We're the sentries. These guys never meet without security." Davidson considered this observation. Rodriguez was right to be concerned. Taliban commanders didn't survive long without being paranoid about security. The absence of obvious guards around the compound was unusual, but their intelligence had been solid. The meeting was confirmed through multiple sources, including intercepted communications and human intelligence assets in the area. Petty Officer Second Class Tony Bulldog Chun, the team's explosives expert and medic, completed their four-man unit. Chun was methodically checking his equipment, ensuring his medical supplies and demolition charges were readily accessible. Despite his relatively junior rank, Chen's technical expertise and steady nerves under pressure made him invaluable to the team's operations. "Control, this is Reaper 6. Davidson spoke quietly into his radio. "Eyes on target location. Confirming multiple heat signatures inside primary structure. Requesting permission to move to Phase 2. The response came back immediately through his earpiece. "Reaper 6, this is Control. You're cleared for Phase 2. Remember, positive identification required before engagement. Watch your 6 out there." Phase 2 involved moving closer to the compound for positive visual identification of their targets. The team would need to leave their elevated position and make their way down into the valley, using whatever cover the rocky terrain provided. It was always the most dangerous part of any surveillance mission, as they would be more exposed and have fewer escape routes if things went wrong. The four SEALs began their descent, moving in a tactical formation that kept them spread out enough to avoid being caught in a single enemy engagement, but close enough to provide mutual support. Davidson took point, using his night vision to navigate the treacherous terrain while watching for any signs of enemy activity. Morrison followed 20 meters behind, his sniper rifle ready to provide covering fire if needed. Rodriguez maintained their communication link while monitoring for any electronic signatures that might indicate enemy surveillance equipment. Chun brought up the rear, watching their back trail for any signs they were being followed. The valley floor was a maze of rocks, dried creek beds, and sparse vegetation that provided some concealment but limited cover. As they moved closer to the compound, the team could hear voices speaking in Pashto, confirming that their targets were indeed present. Davidson motioned for the team to take up observation positions behind a cluster of large boulders about 50 meters from the building. Through their scopes and night vision equipment, the SEALs could see into the compound's main room, where several men were seated around a table covered with maps and documents. The facial recognition software on their equipment began analyzing the faces, comparing them against their target database. Within minutes, they had positive identification on 2 of the 3 commanders they were hunting. "Control, this is Reaper 6, Davidson reported. Positive ID on targets 1 and 2. Still looking for target 3. Recommend we maintain observation until all 3 are confirmed present. Roger, Reaper 6. Continue surveillance. Support assets standing by." The SEALs settled in for what they expected to be a routine surveillance operation. They had clear lines of sight to the compound, good communication with their headquarters, and predetermined extraction routes if the mission went sideways. Everything was proceeding according to plan. But, as Rodriguez had sensed earlier, something was indeed wrong. High above their position, on ridgelines they couldn't see in the darkness, enemy fighters were moving into position. The Taliban had known about the SEAL team's presence almost from the moment they'd entered the valley. The meeting in the compound wasn't the real operation. It was bait in an elaborate trap designed to lure American Special Forces into a carefully prepared kill zone. The enemy had learned hard lessons from previous encounters with American Special Operations Forces. They knew that small teams of highly trained soldiers could inflict devastating casualties if given the initiative. But those same small teams were vulnerable if they could be surrounded and forced to fight on the enemy's terms. Tonight, Taliban fighters were preparing to turn the SEALs' own tactics against them. As the SEALs maintained their surveillance, enemy fighters armed with AK-47s, rocket-propelled grenades, and machine guns were quietly surrounding their position. The trap was being set with patience and precision, waiting for the perfect moment to spring shut. The Taliban commanders had sacrificed themselves as bait, knowing that capturing or killing an entire SEAL team would be worth a loss of 3 men, no matter how senior. Chun was the first to sense trouble. His training as a medic had taught him to be acutely aware of his surroundings, and something in the night, sounds around them had changed. The normal chirping of insects had stopped in several areas, suggesting movement through the vegetation. He tapped Rodriguez on the shoulder and pointed toward a ridgeline where he thought he'd seen a brief reflection of starlight off metal. Rodriguez shifted his night vision in that direction, but saw nothing obvious. However, his communication equipment was beginning to pick up faint electronic signatures that suggested the presence of radio transmissions nearby. Enemy forces often used simple radio systems to coordinate their movements, and the scattered signals Rodriguez was detecting indicated multiple groups moving in the area. "Reaper, we might have company," Rodriguez whispered in his throat mic, getting multiple electronic signatures, and Bulldog thinks he's seeing movement on the ridgelines. Davidson carefully scanned the area around their position. His years of experience had taught him to trust his team's instincts, especially when multiple indicators pointed toward potential danger. The mission parameters called for them to maintain surveillance until all 3 targets were confirmed, but tactical situations could change rapidly, and team safety always took priority over mission objectives. As Davidson weighed their options, the situation around them was becoming increasingly dangerous. Unknown to the SEALs, over 30 Taliban fighters had positioned themselves in a rough circle around the valley floor, with escape routes blocked and killing fields prepared. Machine gun positions had been established to provide overlapping fields of fire, and RPG teams were ready to target any vehicles that might attempt a rescue operation. The trap was nearly complete, but the Taliban commanders were waiting for one more element before springing their ambush. They wanted to ensure that no other American forces were in the immediate area, and they were positioning additional fighters to block the most likely routes that reinforcements would use to reach the trapped SEALs. Morrison, who had been monitoring the compound through his sniper scope, noticed that the meeting inside seemed to be breaking up. The men around the table were gathering their documents and preparing to leave. If the SEALs were going to complete their mission, they would need to act soon or risk losing their targets. "Reaper, looks like our party is ending," Morrison reported. "If we're going to do this, it needs to be now." Davidson found himself facing the classic special operations dilemma: complete the mission or preserve the team. The intelligence they'd gathered was valuable, and eliminating the Taliban commanders would save coalition lives down the road. But the growing signs of enemy activity around their position suggested that staying much longer would be extremely dangerous. "Control, this is Reaper 6, Davidson called back to headquarters. "We have positive ID on 2 of 3 targets, but I'm getting indications of possible enemy activity in our area. Requesting guidance on mission priority." The response took longer than usual, suggesting that the decision was being elevated to higher command levels. When it came, the orders were clear but sobering. "Reaper 6, mission priority remains target elimination. However, team safety is paramount. Use your best judgment, but be advised that these targets represent significant intelligence value." Davidson understood the subtext. The mission was important enough that headquarters wanted them to take calculated risks, but they wouldn't order the team to stay if the situation became too dangerous. The decision would ultimately be his to make, based on his assessment of the tactical situation and his team's capabilities. As the SEAL team leader considered their options, the final pieces of the Taliban trap were falling into place. Enemy fighters had confirmed that no other American forces were in the immediate area, and their commanders had given the order to prepare for the attack. Within minutes, the quiet valley would erupt in violence as the ambush was triggered. The SEALs had no idea that they were about to face the fight of their lives, or that their survival would depend on help from a source none of them could have imagined. In the darkness around them, death was preparing to strike from multiple directions simultaneously, and their only hope would come from someone who shouldn't have been there at all. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test every aspect of their training, their equipment, and their will to survive. 4 of America's most elite warriors were about to discover that sometimes even the best preparation isn't enough when the enemy holds every advantage. But they were also about to witness something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about warfare and the extraordinary capabilities that emerge when ordinary people face impossible odds. The compound below continued its activity, unaware that it was serving as bait in a trap that was about to change the lives of everyone involved. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the valley, a figure moved with purpose toward a confrontation that would become legend among those who witnessed it, and remain classified in files that few would ever see. The first shot came from a ridge 300 meters to their north, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating the rocky outcropping before disappearing back into darkness. The bullet struck the ground inches from Rodriguez's position, sending stone fragments flying through the night air. There was no mistaking what had just happened. They were under attack. "Contact north," Davidson shouted into his throat mic as he rolled behind better cover. The peaceful surveillance operation had instantly transformed into a deadly firefight, and the SEAL team found themselves in the worst possible position, caught in open ground with limited cover and no clear escape route. Within seconds, the entire valley erupted in gunfire. Muzzle flashes appeared on ridgelines in every direction as Taliban fighters opened fire from carefully prepared positions. The distinctive chatter of AK-47s mixed with the heavier sound of machine guns, creating a deadly symphony that echoed off the valley walls. Tracer rounds streaked through the darkness like angry fireflies, their paths crisscrossing the air where the SEALs had been positioned moments before. Morrison immediately shifted his position and began returning fire, his sniper rifle picking out targets illuminated by their own muzzle flashes. His training allowed him to remain calm under pressure, methodically acquiring targets and squeezing off carefully aimed shots. "I count at least 6 positions on the North Ridge," he reported between shots. "They've got us in a crossfire." Chin had taken cover behind a large boulder and was frantically checking his equipment. The team's medical supplies and explosive charges would be crucial if they had any hope of fighting their way out of the ambush. As bullets whined overhead and struck the rocks around him, Chin began setting up defensive charges that could create temporary barriers or eliminate enemy positions if needed. Rodriguez was working his communications equipment with desperate intensity, trying to reach their headquarters and call for immediate support. Control, this is Reaper 6, he shouted into his radio. "We are taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Request immediate air support and extract." The response crackled through heavy static and the sound of ongoing gunfire. "Reaper 6, we copy your traffic. Air support is 20 minutes out. Nearest ground support is 45 minutes. Hold your position and wait for support. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. The Taliban fighters had chosen their ambush site well, positioning themselves to maximize their advantages while minimizing the SEALs' ability to fight back effectively. The valley floor offered limited cover, and the enemy held the high ground on all sides. Worse, the Taliban fighters were using disciplined fire tactics, coordinating their attacks to keep the Americans pinned down while conserving ammunition. Davidson quickly assessed their tactical situation. They were outnumbered at least 6-1, possibly more. The enemy held superior positions and had prepared the battlefield to their advantage. The SEAL team's advanced equipment and superior training gave them some advantages, but they were rapidly being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of enemy fire coming from multiple directions. "We need to move," Davidson called to his team. "This position is compromised. Chun, can you give us some breathing room?" Chun was already preparing explosive charges that could create temporary diversions. "Give me 30 seconds, he shouted back, his hands working quickly to set timers on small demolition charges. The explosions wouldn't eliminate enemy positions, but they might create enough confusion to allow the team to move to better cover. As Chun worked, the enemy fire intensified. RPGs began streaking across the valley, their distinctive whoosh-pop sound followed by devastating explosions that sent rocks and debris flying in all directions. The Taliban fighters were no longer content to simply pin down the Americans. They were actively trying to eliminate them with increasingly powerful weapons. Morrison's sniper fire had temporarily suppressed some of the enemy positions, but New muzzle flashes continued to appear as additional Taliban fighters moved into the fight. "They're bringing in reinforcements," Morrison reported grimly. This wasn't random contact. This was planned. The realization that they had walked into a deliberate trap changed everything. The Taliban had known they were coming and had prepared accordingly. The meeting in the compound had been bait, designed to lure American special forces into a carefully prepared kill zone. The enemy had studied their tactics, anticipated their movements, and set up a nearly perfect ambush. Rodriguez managed to establish better contact with headquarters, but the news wasn't encouraging. "Control reports air support is delayed due to weather conditions," he told Davidson. "Ground support is moving, but still 30 minutes out." 30 minutes was an eternity in their current situation. The Taliban fighters were gradually tightening their circle, moving closer while maintaining suppressive fire that kept the SEALs pinned down. Ammunition was becoming a concern, as the Americans couldn't afford to waste rounds while the enemy seemed to have unlimited supplies. Chen's explosions created temporary chaos on the North Ridge, allowing the team to move to a slightly better position among a cluster of larger rocks. The new position offered better protection from direct fire, but it also left them more isolated and further from any potential escape routes. They were trading immediate survival for long-term tactical disadvantage. As the firefight continued, the Taliban fighters began using more sophisticated tactics. Instead of simply overwhelming the Americans with volume of fire, they started coordinating their attacks to probe for weaknesses in the SEALs' defensive position. Small groups would advance under covering fire, while others maintained pressure from different directions, forcing the Americans to constantly shift their defensive focus. Davidson recognized the enemy's evolving tactics with growing concern. These weren't typical Taliban fighters using standard guerrilla techniques. Someone with military training was coordinating the attack, possibly a former Afghan military officer who had defected to the Taliban or a foreign advisor with professional military experience. The coordination and discipline of the assault suggested a level of tactical sophistication that the SEALs hadn't expected to encounter. "Thunder, how's our ammunition situation?" Davidson called to Morrison during a brief lull in the firing. Morrison quickly checked his remaining rounds. "Down to about 60% on rifle ammo, maybe 40 rounds left for the sniper rifle," he reported. "At this rate of fire, we've got maybe 10 minutes before we're critically low." The ammunition situation was becoming desperate. While the SEALs had brought enough rounds for a typical surveillance mission with possible limited engagement, they hadn't anticipated a prolonged firefight against superior numbers. Every shot had to count, but the enemy's tactics were forcing them to expend ammunition to maintain their defensive position. Chun had been monitoring their radio communications and intercepting enemy transmissions when possible. His language skills allowed him to understand some of the Taliban fighters' coordination, and what he was hearing wasn't encouraging. "They're talking about moving more fighters into blocking positions," Chen reported. "Sounds like they're trying to completely surround us." Rodriguez was working frantically to coordinate with any available support assets. "I'm trying to reach any aircraft in the area," he told Davidson. "Maybe we can get someone to make a gun run, even if they're not specifically assigned to support us." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. The enemy was bringing in additional forces while the SEALs' ammunition was running low, and their options were becoming increasingly limited. The superior enemy numbers and positioning meant that even their advanced training and equipment might not be enough to survive until help arrived. As if responding to Rodriguez's efforts, the radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. "Any American forces in grid sector 7 to 4, this is Condor Flight. We're in the area and monitoring emergency frequencies. What's your situation?" Rodriguez immediately responded. "Condor Flight, this is Reaper 6. We are 4 American personnel taking heavy fire from multiple positions in grid 7-4. Charlie. Estimate 30-plus enemy fighters with small arms and RPGs. Request immediate air support." Reaper 6, this is Condor Lead. "We're 2 A-10s with full ordnance, but we need you to mark target positions. Can you provide laser designation or describe enemy locations?" The appearance of close air support aircraft changed the tactical equation significantly. A-10 Warthogs were specifically designed for close air support missions, and their 30mm cannons could devastate enemy positions that were threatening ground forces. However, the enemy fighters were positioned close enough to the SEALs' location that any airstrikes would need to be extremely precise to avoid friendly fire incidents. Morrison immediately began identifying priority targets for the aircraft. "I can see muzzle flashes from at least 4 machine gun positions and multiple rifle positions," he reported. "But they're within danger close range. Some of them are less than 100 meters from our position." Danger close air support required extraordinary precision and coordination between ground forces and aircraft. The margin for error was minimal, and any mistakes could result in friendly casualties. However, given their desperate situation, it was a risk the SEAL team was willing to take. As Rodriguez coordinated with the A-10 pilots, the enemy fire suddenly intensified again. The Taliban fighters had apparently detected the radio transmissions and realized that air support was incoming. They began concentrating their fire in a final attempt to eliminate the Americans before the aircraft could intervene. "They know air support is coming," Davidson shouted over the increasing gunfire. "They're making their final push." Enemy fighters began advancing down the ridgelines under heavy covering fire, rushing toward the SEALs' position in what appeared to be a coordinated assault designed to overrun their defensive position. The Taliban commanders had apparently decided that their only chance was to eliminate the Americans quickly, before the aircraft could effectively engage their scattered positions. Chin detonated his remaining explosive charges in an attempt to slow the advancing fighters, creating temporary barriers of debris and smoke. Morrison switched to rapid fire with his rifle, abandoning careful marksmanship in favor of volume of fire to help repel the assault. Rodriguez continued coordinating with the aircraft while maintaining defensive fire, and Davidson moved between positions to direct his team's response to the evolving threat. The situation had reached its most critical point. The SEALs were nearly out of ammunition, completely surrounded by superior enemy forces, and facing a final assault that would likely overwhelm their position within minutes. Even with air support incoming, it might not arrive in time to prevent the enemy from overrunning their defensive position. As tracer rounds crisscrossed the darkness and explosions lit up the valley with brief, violent flashes of light, the 4 American warriors prepared for what might be their final firefight. Their training, equipment, and determination had brought them this far, but they were facing odds that even elite special forces might not be able to overcome. But unknown to anyone in the valley, American or Taliban, the tactical situation was about to change in ways that none of them could have anticipated. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the immediate battle area, someone was moving with purpose toward the firefight. Someone who had been watching the developing situation and preparing to intervene in ways that would defy every conventional understanding of warfare and combat effectiveness. The desperate radio call for help was about to be answered, but not by the aircraft overhead or the ground forces still minutes away. Help was coming from a direction that no one expected, in a form that would challenge everything the SEALs thought they knew about what was possible in combat. The first sign that something had changed came when the machine gun position on the eastern ridge suddenly went silent. Morrison had been tracking that particular weapon because its position allowed it to enfilade their defensive area, forcing the SEALs to keep low and limiting their ability to return effective fire. The gun had been firing in disciplined bursts every few seconds, but now there was nothing, just empty darkness where muzzle flashes had been moments before. "East Ridge gun is down," Morrison reported, momentarily confused by the unexpected development. "Can't see what happened to it." Davidson was too focused on coordinating their defense against the advancing Taliban fighters to give much thought to one silenced weapon. Enemy fighters were less than 50 meters away and closing fast under covering fire from multiple positions. Chin was down to his last explosive charges. Rodriguez was trying to talk the A-10s on a target while maintaining defensive fire, and Morrison was rapidly burning through his remaining ammunition trying to slow the advance. But 30 seconds later, another enemy position went dark. This time, it was a group of 3 riflemen who had been advancing down a rocky slope toward the SEALs' southern flank. Morrison had been tracking their movement through his scope, watching them use cover and concealment techniques that suggested professional military training. Then, between one moment and the next, they simply disappeared from view. "Something's happening out there," Morrison told Davidson during a brief pause in the enemy fire. "I'm losing sight of targets, but not because they're taking cover. They're just gone." Rodriguez had noticed the same phenomenon while monitoring enemy radio communications. The Taliban fighters' coordination had become increasingly frantic over the past few minutes, with reports of lost contact with various units and confused requests for status updates. The disciplined military-style communications that had characterized the early stages of the ambush were breaking down into scattered, panicked transmissions. "Their comms are falling apart," Rodriguez reported. "I'm hearing reports of casualties, but no one seems to know what's causing them." Chun, who had been focused on setting up his final defensive charges, suddenly grabbed Davidson's arm and pointed toward a ridgeline about 200 meters away. "Did you see that?" he whispered urgently. Davidson looked in the direction Chun was indicating, but saw nothing except darkness and the occasional muzzle flash from enemy positions. "See what?" "Movement. Someone moving fast across the rocks. Too fast to be normal infantry movement." Before Davidson could respond, another enemy machine gun position, this one on the northern ridge, abruptly ceased firing. Through his night vision, Morrison could see figures moving around the position, but he couldn't tell if they were enemy fighters repositioning or something else entirely. The thermal signature was confusing, showing rapid movement that didn't match typical infantry tactics. The Taliban fighters who had been advancing toward the SEALs' position suddenly slowed their assault, with many taking defensive positions instead of continuing to advance. Their commanders were apparently receiving reports that were causing them to reconsider their tactics. Radio chatter in Pashto became increasingly agitated, with multiple voices speaking over each other in apparent confusion. "Condor lead, this is Reaper 6, Rodriguez called to the A-10 pilots who were still trying to establish clear target identification. "Something's changed down here. Enemy fire has decreased significantly, but we're not sure why." "Roger, Reaper 6. We're seeing thermal signatures moving around your area, but we can't identify friend from foe with certainty. Are you expecting friendly forces in your immediate area?" Davidson keyed his radio immediately. "Negative, Condor lead. No friendly forces scheduled in this area. All American personnel should be at our position." The mystery deepened as more enemy positions fell silent in rapid succession. Morrison, who had the best view of the battlefield through his sniper scope, was tracking what appeared to be systematic elimination of Taliban positions, but he couldn't identify what was causing it. Thermal signatures showed rapid movement between enemy positions, but the movement patterns were unlike anything in his experience. "I'm seeing something moving between enemy positions," Morrison reported, his voice carrying a note of bewilderment. "Fast movement, definitely human size, but the pattern is all wrong. No one moves that quickly across that kind of terrain." Chun was monitoring different sectors with his own night vision equipment when he suddenly stiffened. "There!" he hissed, pointing toward a rocky outcropping where Taliban fighters had established a firing position. "Watch that position." As the SEALs focused their attention on the indicated area, they witnessed something that challenged their understanding of what was possible in combat. A figure appeared briefly in their field of view, moving with fluid grace across terrain that should have required slow, careful movement. The figure seemed to flow from one piece of cover to another, covering distances that should have taken minutes in a matter of seconds. The Taliban firing position that Chun had been watching suddenly erupted in brief, violent action. Muzzle flashes flickered for just a moment, followed by silence. When Morrison adjusted his scope to examine the area more carefully, he could see bodies, but no sign of whoever had neutralized the position. "What the hell was that?" Morrison muttered, his professional composure shaken by what he had witnessed. Davidson was trying to process the rapidly changing tactical situation. The ambush that had threatened to overwhelm his team was systematically falling apart, but not due to anything they were doing. Someone or something was moving through the enemy positions with lethal efficiency, eliminating threats faster than seemed possible for a single person. Rodriguez intercepted a Taliban radio transmission that provided additional insight into what was happening. "I'm picking up enemy chatter about a ghost or phantom attacking their positions," he reported. "They're talking about losing entire squads without seeing their attacker." The Taliban fighters' confusion and fear were becoming evident in their increasingly undisciplined fire. Instead of the coordinated assault that had nearly overwhelmed the SEALs minutes earlier, the enemy was now firing randomly into the darkness, apparently at shadows and imagined threats. Their tactical coordination had completely broken down. Morrison continued tracking the mysterious figure through his scope, trying to understand the tactics being employed. What he observed defied conventional military doctrine. The figure moved without regard for normal cover and concealment principles, yet remained virtually invisible to both thermal and standard night vision. When engagements occurred, they were brief and decisive, lasting only seconds before the figure disappeared again. "Whoever this is, they're using techniques I've never seen before," Morrison reported. "Movement patterns are completely outside anything we trained for. They're covering ground like they're running, but they're doing it silently and without being detected." Chen had been studying the aftermath of several neutralized enemy positions and was beginning to piece together additional details about their mysterious ally. "The engagements are all close quarters," he observed. "No muzzle flashes from rifles, no explosions from grenades. Whatever they're doing it up close and personal." The implication was sobering. Close-quarters combat against prepared enemy positions required extraordinary skill and courage under the best of circumstances. Attempting such tactics alone, against multiple positions, while moving across open terrain, should have been impossible. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Enemy positions were being systematically eliminated by someone using exactly those tactics. Davidson attempted to establish communication with their unexpected ally. "Unknown friendly, this is Reaper 6. If you can hear this transmission, please identify yourself and your intentions." There was no response, but the systematic elimination of enemy positions continued. Another Taliban machine gun fell silent, followed by a group of riflemen who had been providing covering fire for the now-stalled assault. The enemy's tactical situation was deteriorating as rapidly as the SEALs had been improving. Rodriguez was monitoring multiple radio frequencies, trying to gather intelligence about what was happening around them. "I'm counting at least 8 enemy positions that have gone dark in the past 10 minutes, he reported. Based on their previous communications, that represents at least 20 fighters eliminated. The mathematical implications were staggering. Even highly trained special operations soldiers rarely achieve casualty ratios approaching 20-1 in close combat situations. The idea that a single individual could eliminate that many prepared enemy fighters in such a short time frame challenged every assumption about combat effectiveness and human capabilities. Morrison suddenly tensed behind his scope. "I've got visual on our Phantom," he announced quietly. 200 meters, moving toward that cluster of rocks where we marked 3 enemy positions. The SEALs watched in fascination as their mysterious ally approached the Taliban positions. Through their night vision equipment, they could see a human figure moving with impossible grace across terrain that should have made such movement suicidal. The figure seemed to anticipate enemy fire, moving in patterns that kept them consistently out of the line of sight from known enemy positions. The engagement that followed lasted less than 30 seconds. There were brief flashes of movement, the sound of suppressed weapons fire, and then silence. When Morrison checked the area with his thermal scope, he could detect no movement from positions that had been actively engaging them minutes earlier. "All 3 positions are down," Morrison reported, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and disbelief. 30 seconds, 3 positions, probably 6 to 8 fighters. "I've never seen anything like it." Chin was attempting to understand the tactical implications of what they were witnessing. "How is this possible?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. "One person can't eliminate this many fighters this quickly without taking casualties." Davidson was wondering the same thing, but he was also focused on the changing tactical situation. The Taliban ambush that had threatened to annihilate his team was falling apart under the unexpected intervention. Enemy fire had decreased to sporadic, undisciplined shooting, and their radio communications suggested widespread panic and confusion. "Condor lead, this is Reaper 6, Davidson called to the A-10 pilots. "The tactical situation has changed significantly. Unknown friendly forces appear to be engaging enemy positions. Recommend you hold fire until we can sort this out." "Roger, Reaper 6. We're holding high and observing. Recommend you attempt to establish contact with your unknown friendly to prevent any blue-on-blue incidents." Davidson had been trying to establish communication without success, but he decided to attempt a different approach. Using his rifle's laser designator, he began painting specific enemy positions that were still active, hoping that their mysterious ally would understand the signal and coordinate accordingly. The response was immediate and dramatic. Within minutes, every position that Davidson had marked with his laser was systematically engaged and neutralized. The coordination was perfect, suggesting that their ally had sophisticated night vision equipment and was monitoring their laser designations. Rodriguez had been analyzing enemy radio traffic and provided an update that confirmed what they were observing. "Enemy communications are completely broken down," he reported. "I'm hearing retreat orders, requests for extraction, and reports of massive casualties. They're calling for reinforcements, but it sounds like their chain of command is falling apart." The tactical situation had completely reversed in less than 15 minutes. The Taliban force that had almost overwhelmed four elite American warriors was being systematically destroyed by a single individual using tactics that seemed to defy military logic. The SEALs found themselves observers to a demonstration of combat effectiveness that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. Morrison continued tracking their mysterious ally through his scope, trying to understand and learn from the tactics being employed. "Whoever this is, they're rewriting the book on small unit tactics," he observed. "The speed, the precision, the coordination, it's like they're playing by completely different rules." As the enemy fire died away and the valley began to fall silent except for the distant sound of Taliban fighters retreating, the SEALs realized that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Their desperate situation had been transformed by the intervention of someone whose capabilities exceeded anything they had encountered in years of elite military service. But even as their immediate survival seemed assured, new questions were emerging. Who was this mysterious figure? Where had they come from? What kind of training or background could produce such extraordinary combat capabilities? And most importantly, what did their intervention mean for the SEALs and their mission? The sound of approaching helicopters broke the relative quiet of the valley as American ground support finally arrived at the scene. Two Black Hawks circled the area while their crews assessed the tactical situation and prepared for landing. The pilot's voice crackled through Rodriguez's radio, requesting confirmation that the landing zone was secure. "This is Reaper 6, Davidson responded. "Landing zone is secure. Enemy forces have withdrawn. We have one additional friendly on site who assisted in neutralizing the threat. Alex had been monitoring the approaching aircraft and checking equipment in preparation to leave. I should go before your extraction team arrives," Alex said to Davidson. "Too many questions if I'm here when they land." Davidson understood the operational security concerns, but he was reluctant to lose contact with someone who possessed such valuable intelligence about enemy activities. "How can we reach you if we need to coordinate again?" Alex pulled out a small device that looked like a modified GPS unit. "Monitor frequency 243.775 between 0300 and 0315 hours daily. If I have actionable intelligence about threats to coalition forces, I'll transmit warnings on that frequency." Rodriguez quickly copied the frequency information into his communication log. What call sign should we listen for? Echo 7, Alex replied, then paused and looked at each of the SEALs directly. What you saw tonight stays between us. Official reports should focus on the tactical situation and the threat intelligence, not on individual capabilities or specific operational details. Morrison nodded his understanding. Information security. If word gets out about your capabilities, the enemy will adapt their countermeasures. And my operational effectiveness will be compromised, Alex confirmed. The Taliban can't prepare for threats they don't understand. Chin was studying Alex's equipment configuration one final time, trying to memorize details that might be useful for future operations. Your gear setup is impressive. Custom night vision integration, communications package, weapons configuration. How long did it take to develop that system? About 18 months of trial and error, Alex replied. Operating alone requires equipment redundancy and reliability that team operations don't face. If something breaks and you don't have backup, the mission fails and you probably don't survive. The approaching helicopters were getting closer, and Alex began moving toward a rocky outcropping that would provide concealment from the aircraft. Remember the frequency. If I learn about other ambushes or specific threats, I'll pass the information along. Davidson watched their mysterious ally disappear into the darkness with the same fluid movement that had characterized their earlier tactical operations. Within seconds, Alex had vanished completely, leaving no trace of their presence except for the eliminated enemy positions scattered around the valley. The Blackhawks landed in a swirl of dust and rotor wash, disgorging a full platoon of Army Rangers who immediately established a defensive perimeter around the landing zone. The Ranger lieutenant approached Davidson with questions about the tactical situation and the status of the enemy threat. Threat has been neutralized, Davidson reported formally. Enemy force estimated at 30-plus fighters was eliminated by unknown friendly forces. Area is secure for extraction. The Ranger lieutenant looked puzzled. Unknown friendly forces? Who was providing support? Davidson exchanged glances with his team members before responding carefully. Independent contractor with extensive local knowledge. Provided tactical assistance during enemy ambush, then departed before extraction. As the SEALs gathered their equipment and prepared to board the helicopter for extraction, Morrison took one final look around the valley through his scope. I count 26 confirmed enemy casualties, he reported. No American casualties, no apparent casualties among friendly forces. The mathematical reality was staggering. A Taliban ambush that had been perfectly positioned to eliminate an entire SEAL team had instead resulted in the complete destruction of the attacking force with no coalition casualties. The tactical turnaround defied conventional military analysis and would undoubtedly generate extensive investigation and discussion among military leadership. Rodriguez was documenting the engagement details that would be included in their after-action report. The challenge would be accurately describing the events without revealing information that might compromise Alex's operational security or future effectiveness. During the helicopter flight back to their forward operating base, the SEALs discussed how to handle the inevitable debriefing sessions that would follow their return. Senior officers would want detailed explanations of how they had survived an ambush that should have been catastrophic, and intelligence personnel would be intensely interested in any information about Taliban tactical evolution. We stick to the facts, Davidson told his team. Enemy ambush, assistance from independent contractor with local knowledge, threat eliminated. We don't speculate about capabilities or methods we observed. Chin was already thinking about the broader implications of their encounter with Alex. If there are other independent operators working in the region, coalition forces should know about them. Coordination could prevent blue-on-blue incidents. But force coordination might compromise their effectiveness, Morrison pointed out. Some operations work better when they remain independent and unpredictable. Rodriguez was monitoring radio traffic and picked up communications that provided additional context about the night's events. Intelligence reports are coming in about significant Taliban leadership casualties in our area of operations. Sounds like Alex was right about the meeting being legitimate. The bait included actual high-value targets. The intelligence development meant that their mission had been more successful than anyone had initially realized. The surveillance operation that had nearly cost them their lives had actually resulted in the elimination of significant Taliban leadership, disrupting enemy operations throughout the region. Back at the forward operating base, the SEALs were immediately taken to separate debriefing rooms where intelligence officers and senior commanders waited with detailed questions about every aspect of their mission. The debriefing process would continue for hours as analysts tried to understand exactly what had happened and extract every possible piece of actionable intelligence. Davidson found himself facing Colonel Martinez, the officer who had communicated with them during their extraction. Martinez had extensive special operations experience and understood the complexities of unconventional warfare, but even he seemed puzzled by the night's events. Lieutenant Commander, your team survived an ambush that was specifically designed to eliminate American Special Forces, Martinez began. The tactical analysis suggests you were facing overwhelming odds with virtually no chance of survival until unknown forces intervened. I need to understand exactly what happened. Davidson had prepared his response carefully. Sir, our position was overrun when an individual with extensive local knowledge and military training engaged the enemy forces from positions we hadn't observed. The intervention was precisely coordinated and professionally executed. What was your assessment of this individual's background and capabilities? Former military, extensive regional experience, equipment, and tactics consistent with special operations training. Capable of independent operation in hostile territory for extended periods. Martinez was taking detailed notes. Did they provide any intelligence about enemy operations or tactical changes? Davidson shared the information Alex had provided about Taliban adaptation to coalition special operations tactics, careful to focus on the intelligence value rather than the source's specific capabilities. The briefing continued for 2 hours as Martinez explored every detail of the engagement and its implications. Similar sessions were being conducted with Morrison, Rodriguez, and Chun in adjacent rooms. The consistency of their accounts would be verified, and any discrepancies would trigger additional investigation. However, the SEALs had agreed on their approach, and their accounts matched perfectly. When the formal debriefings concluded, the 4 SEALs gathered in their team room to decompress and discuss the night's events privately. They were exhausted, but the adrenaline of their near-death experience and subsequent rescue made sleep unlikely for several hours. That was the closest I've ever come to not making it home, Morrison admitted. Without Alex's intervention, we would have been overrun. Chun was reviewing the tactical lessons from their experience. The enemy adaptation to our methods is concerning. If they're successfully predicting our operations well enough to set up ambushes, we need to change our approaches. Rodriguez was thinking about the broader implications. Alex demonstrated that solo operations can be effective under certain circumstances. Maybe we need to consider incorporating more independent operators into our overall strategy. Davidson was focused on the immediate challenge of maintaining operational security while ensuring that Alex's intelligence warnings reached the people who could act on them. We need to monitor that radio frequency religiously. If Alex has information about other ambushes, we have to make sure it gets to the right people. Over the following weeks, the SEALs maintained their monitoring schedule on frequency 243.775. Alex's transmissions were brief and professional, providing specific warnings about planned Taliban operations that allowed coalition forces to avoid or counter several potential ambushes. Each warning proved accurate, and the tactical intelligence was credited with saving dozens of coalition lives. The identity of Echo 7 became something of a legend among special operations personnel in the region. Stories circulated about the mysterious figure who could eliminate entire enemy units single-handedly and seemed to possess unlimited intelligence about Taliban activities. Most of the stories were exaggerated, but the core truth remained. someone was operating independently in enemy territory with extraordinary effectiveness. Military intelligence analysts spent considerable effort trying to identify Alex and understand her background and capabilities. However, their operational security was flawless, and no conclusive information was ever developed. Alex remained a phantom, known only through their radio transmissions and the results of their operations. For Davidson and his team, the experience fundamentally changed their understanding of what was possible in warfare. They had witnessed capabilities that exceeded anything in their training or experience, demonstrated by someone operating under impossible conditions with resources that seemed inadequate for the results achieved. The official after-action reports focused on the tactical lessons and intelligence gathered from the engagement. References to Alex were minimal and carefully worded to avoid compromising operational security. The 26 enemy casualties were attributed to coordinated defensive operations supported by local assets with superior terrain knowledge. But among the special operations community, the story of the Phantom who saved 4 SEALs and eliminated 25 enemy fighters became a cautionary tale about underestimating human capabilities and the importance of adaptation in warfare. The night in the Afghan Valley had demonstrated that conventional tactical analysis didn't account for all possibilities, and that sometimes help comes from sources that defy explanation. Years later, when Davidson had retired from active duty and was teaching at the Naval War College, he would use the experience as a case study in unconventional warfare and the importance of maintaining operational flexibility. He never revealed the specific details of Alex's capabilities or identity, but he emphasized the lesson that warfare constantly evolves and that success often depends on recognizing and adapting to unexpected developments. The frequency 243.775 continued to carry warnings from Echo 7 for 18 months after the ambush. Then, one day, the transmissions simply stopped. Whether Alex had completed their mission, relocated to another area of operations, or met a different fate remained unknown. The Phantom who had emerged from darkness to save 4 American warriors disappeared back into legend, leaving only the memory of impossible capabilities and the knowledge that sometimes, when all hope seems lost, help can come from the most unexpected sources. The truth about that night in Afghanistan remained classified in files that few would ever see. But for those who were there, it served as a permanent reminder that the boundaries of human capability are far broader than most people imagine, and that extraordinary circumstances can reveal extraordinary potential in ordinary people who refuse to accept that defeat is inevitable.